I'm Makda Ghebreslassie. I am a host with Marketplace, a consumer investigative show here in Canada, and I want to thank everybody who's joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. Today we are talking about how to avoid being hacked, and joining me now is security expert Theo Van Wyk. So your company, Scalar, usually helps businesses with their security.
Correct.
But on this week's episode, which airs tonight at 8 o'clock across most time regions in the country, your team actually helps us hack a Canadian home that's filled with smart devices.
Yes.
So maybe you could tell everybody a little bit about what they did.
Absolutely. So, I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at a house or a home with smart technology in it, it's people connected with technology. And that's not really all that different from a corporation, where it's a building with people working through technology to accomplish something, right? So for us, helping out with this project was actually really interesting. It was able to bring what we do every day a little bit closer to home and demonstrate that. In many of these cases, it's the interaction between the human and the technology interface that creates interesting scenarios that can be either exploited or that becomes the strength in how we set up things.
So we see in this episode that your ethical hackers were able to gain control of the devices and actually turn lights on and off. They were able to unlock the door, this smart technology device. They were able to unlock it and even walk right into the house. So how did they do that?
Absolutely. So the thing to remember here, and this was interesting, when we started the project, we looked at each of the individual components individually and tested it in a lab and see what we could accomplish. And they were actually all really secure. We were pleasantly surprised with the security and how effective they were. Once you put it together as an ecosystem, you really have to think about the dependencies and how they're going to interact together. And so that's what we looked at exploiting here. So what we realized is there were some of the technologies that was interacting. For instance, we could speak, once we compromised the cameras, we could talk through the cameras and we could reach Alexa and some of the home automation systems. So in this case there, what normally would have been a command issued from inside the house, which people would consider a secure area, became an area that we could reach into and actually issue commands that could then go beyond what the cameras normally would be able to affect and get to, right?
Now, when you say that the actual devices were secure themselves, it was the overall system. What you mean is your hackers were able to crack the Wi-Fi password. That was one part.
Right. So sort of, if you look at the attack flow of what we did, we obviously had some rules of engagement that we had to stick to that normal hackers wouldn't. So we had to be a little bit more creative. But the first line of attack that we looked at was the Wi-Fi. So how do we get access? Because without access to the devices, there's not much we're going to be able to do. So we looked at the Wi-Fi. We were able to crack the Wi-Fi password in this case, and we can talk about password security in a little bit and things that you would do around that. Once we got into that system, the next thing we immediately checked was for the reuse of passwords. So it's a very common human tendency to pick a password that you think is strong and secure, and because you think it's strong and secure, you reuse it across different platforms. Once we had that access, we actually started gaining access to additional systems, and we were able to get in and manipulate more. Ultimately, for our rules of engagement, the local laptops for the users was off limit. In a real life hacking scenario, that is the very next step we would have done, because that is your nerve center, the brain. Everything from there on happens. So for instance, if I can interrupt your cameras while I'm logging information on your laptop because I've embedded a keylogger, you're going to go and try to troubleshoot your cameras, and you're going to log into the portal to see why your cameras isn't working, and my keylogger, as an example, can capture the credentials right off your laptop. But in our case, that was out of scope, so we had to get a little bit more creative. And inevitably then, we started looking at the human element, and how can we leverage this. So in this case here, we crafted, actually ended up being 2 different phishing attacks to gain credentials. Yeah. And again, we built on what we learned from the camera and by observing the systems, and so we were able to craft something that was good enough that tricked the user into clicking on it and providing credentials. And once we had that, at that stage, all bets were off. Complete control at that stage.
All right, so why don't we take some questions from some of you. Let's see here, we've got a comment here from Daisy on Twitter. This is exactly why I would never get one. People are nuts to put these in their homes. What do you think about that?
I think you need to do what you're comfortable with, right? At Scalar, we have a mantra that we call prepare, defend, respond. And we work our customers and ourselves through this mantra. So what you want to look at here for somebody like Daisy, for instance, is the prepare phase is assessing and thinking through what you're doing with the technology, right? And that is technology specific. So are you comfortable putting a camera in your house? If the answer is yes, what am I going to look at? What am I giving that camera visibility to? What am I viewing? And if the answer is there's a real reason that I want to do that, then the next thing you're going to look at is what are the security measures around that, right? So this is all part of that prepare portion, thinking through what am I doing. Unfortunately, all in the same breath, in Canada, we live in a very safe society, relatively speaking, to the rest of the world. So we're not always used to thinking like the bad guys, but unfortunately you get into a scenario where you have to step back and think, if I could compromise this, what is the effect from that? And once you understand that, you'd move to what we call the defend tier, or the installation, the implementation piece. And now it's like, I've considered the risks, I've looked at the features on the camera sets, I've picked my product accordingly. You know, it might be a brand name solution that has the features that I need. And now I go through and I implement it in that manner. So change default passwords. I'm going to set up two-factor authentication if it can. I'm going to turn on auto updates so that if it has that feature, so I can update my devices and make sure that's secure. And then the next piece that people forget about is the response piece. And that's sort of, how am I going to live with this technology on a day-to-day basis? And this is really where the phishing attacks play a lot. So if I suddenly send you a message saying somebody has compromised your account, you need to reset your password. Have I thought that through? Am I going to blindly click on the link and do that? Am I going to stop and do some checks at the email and see, you know what, this is not going back to my company page. It might be worth just hopping on Google, Googling your company name, going directly to their page and go and reset the password, instead of trusting that link in the email, which is where we would typically insert a redirect or try to find a way in to capture credentials.
Some good information. We've got some more questions here. Sure. I have Kevin Bob Lawson asks on Facebook, how secure is the new Google Home?
So, again, the actual product is quite secure. A lot of it is going to depend on how you implement it and what you're doing with it, and just what other systems you're tying it into. Like we mentioned before, right? We were able to manipulate the lock, the Bluetooth lock on a door that is very secure within itself, but it was tied into a home automation controller that was not secure. So you just have to think this through and just sort of work through that pattern. The reality is, understand your security features. Google Home, for example, has the ability to lock to your voice only. So there's a way of setting it up that it'll voice print your voice, and it'll only take commands from yourself or other people that has their voices set up against it. So right there, for instance, that would get you around some of the threats in the security threats that inherently was available when we were able to get on there, because that was not configured, so we could manipulate that. So again, it's layered security, it's all these steps. Think about where you're placing it. Is your Google Home close to a camera? Is it further away? Is it in an area that makes sense? You can't be scared of technology. Technology is coming. We have to be smart about it. I often think of the analogy around a vehicle or even a door. You can go buy a regular old style lock that is virtually pick-proof and really secure. But if you leave the key sitting under a flower pot on the step and somebody walks up and they find it, that lock doesn't mean anything. So again, the technologies from branded corporations in general is very secure, but you have to go through that thinking of how is it fitting in my ecosystem and how am I using it, and am I prepared to take the responsibility of installing this technology and making it a part of my life.
Is there anything that the consumers can do, or anyone that they can turn to get more information on the products before purchasing them?
Absolutely. So online research, it's, when you look at many facets of our life, it's Googled through and through. A lot of sales professionals in our industry and in other industries are mentioning that when the client comes to them, they know more about the product in many cases than the actual salesperson, right? You walk in at Best Buy to buy something and you know the features that the salesperson on the floor may not know. So just apply that same logic. Read some reviews. There's security companies, different security magazines, they'll review products. Once you find a product that you think is interesting, go and Google that. Spend 20 minutes, 25 minutes, read up on it, look at the security features, look at what other people are saying. It's actually well documented and there's good information out there. Again, more so sometimes around the branded technologies than maybe some of the nameless technologies. So just weigh that out and do some research. ultimately ask around. I've had so many times where people at my children's school comes up to me and they start asking me about Wi-Fi security because I know I'm in the industry.
Right.
And sometimes a quick 5-minute session with them can really significantly improve how they're going to interact with that technology.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions coming in. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible.
Okay.
So right now we have Carol Young Bagshaw asks on Facebook, I get a message that says there is a device with the same IP address as mine. Am I hacked? What do you say?
Well, I would say, where's the message coming from? So be inquisitive, right? Go through that prepare phase, do some investigation. Where's the message coming from? Who sent it? Is it somebody you know? Is it something that actually would be valid to send that information? And what's the call out of the action of that message? Is the message actually asking you to do something, to go somewhere, to input information? So I would need to know a little bit more in assessing it. Right off the bat, just hearing that might be just a regular warning, informational IP from a valid device. So I wouldn't immediately think the sky is falling, but definitely approach it with curiosity and inquisitiveness and dig into it and have a look.
Okay. Well, Carol, if you can get us some more information while we're still going, we'll try to answer that question a little more. But we also have Mark Katona here who asks on Facebook, so bottom line is it really the system that is flawed, or is it the lack of knowledge of setting up proper passwords on the system? What would you say to that?
Well, again, I want to understand what the system is, right? Because there's definitely technologies out there that's vulnerable and that you would have to be careful in deploying. But ultimately, it is the user behavior and how we use it, and it's user training and awareness. The other item that we talk a lot about in security is the risk versus reward and the effort, right? So in our example here, it took us just over 2 hours to crack the Wi-Fi password. Had that password been stronger, it may have taken us 2 weeks, a week or 2 weeks if it was a really strong password, maybe longer. And then the question at that stage becomes, does the target have anything that's valuable enough to me to invest as a hacker or an attacker, to invest that much time at getting around your security defenses? 9 out of the 10 times, the balance is just making sure you're more secure than the items that you're protecting, because what's going to happen is the hackers are going to move on and they're going to start looking elsewhere, because even though it may not cost them, in some cases there is an actual monetary value involved for them for hacking, that it costs them to be doing the hack, but in a lot of times it's just a time investment that, is there an easier way out for me to go and accomplish a similar item?
But what about the manufacturers? Should they be taking extra steps to make the items secure? Because your team actually was able to hack into a system. So one of the devices was the Wink hub in this particular house that we looked at. And a lot of the devices, the lights, the thermostat, was all linked to this hub in order to go online. One of the things it did not have was a 2-step verification. And after our investigation, the company has now said that is something that they will be implementing. So shouldn't all companies have that as the requirement?
There's definitely a best practice standard that companies should strive for. Again, I think the responsibility to a great extent sits with us as a consumer to understand what you're going to be doing with that device. If your Wink hub is just controlling your lights and your thermostat, the reality is, although somebody can use that to cause some havoc and scare you and maybe intimidate you, there's no real physical danger involved there in terms of unlocking a door. The moment you tie in a Bluetooth lock or a garage door opener or anything else into that hub, it comes back to that prepare piece. You have to sit back and think about the implications and what is the risk? What is the new risk that is going with it? And what are the kind of measures that I'm going to implement to mitigate that? So definitely reset default passwords, do regular password changes, updates. I would like to see all manufacturers force you to change the default password at first setup. So there's definitely steps like those that can be taken. But at the same time, if you make something too secure and too arduous, you're also impacting the user experience. So if I have to use 2-factor authentication every time I want to unlock my Bluetooth door when I walk up to the door, it becomes more work than just to take out a key and unlock the door. So at what stage do I lose the benefit of the technology, right? So again, it's striking that balance in when does the security controls make sense and how much security do I want to deploy around it.
Okay, let's see what else is going on here. We have Carol, who, earlier we were talking, she sent us a question and we've got a follow-up from her. If I could just... the message comes up on my laptop. Now remember, Carol was talking about her
The
IP.
message saying duplicate IPs.
Exactly. So the message comes up on my laptop screen in a window, does not tell me to do anything.
Right. So there is a valid, within a laptop, there is a valid command that will warn you when there's multiple addresses on the network. And this can be purely a misconfiguration. So it could be that somewhere along the line, one of the devices was configured with a duplicate address. I wouldn't be concerned right away in terms of worrying about being hacked, but it's definitely something I would look into, because at the very least, it's going to impact her network's functionality, or those two devices that has conflicts with the address is not going to behave the way she'd expect to. So it's something that I would look into. One area would probably be to hop on your wireless router if that is the device on your network that's issuing IP addresses, and having a look in there and see if you can see what has the addresses. After that, maybe a manual step through on the different devices. And this is where reading your user manual is important. I know it's something that as a society we're not fond of, because we want things to be designed that's easy and convenient, but sometimes it's worth pulling out the user manual, spending 5 minutes with the user manual, hopping up in there. And if you can't resolve it that way, email the actual company. If it's a brand name, well-supported company, many times you'd be surprised at the level of support that you can actually get from them.
Okay, some helpful tips for her. Let's see what else is going on online here. We've got Nick Gervais on Facebook. He has another question. Two-step isn't flawless. Is it trivial to convince a telecom representative to generate you a new SIM card to hijack two-step messages? Are we getting that? So, and then how do we talk to our telecom provider to secure our cell phone account for that method of attack?
So when you get in, so I would be careful around SIM card duplication. There's a lot of security measures in place with telcos to avoid that. I think the message is, by the time somebody is going through the effort to duplicate SIM cards to intercept your credentials on a reset, there is something extremely valuable that they're after. So, I want to be careful in digging into that, because there is a human element, like he had mentioned. For the question there was not just around can the card be duplicated. The question there also alluded again to the human element about that operator and will they be able to do it.
Right.
So look into that carefully. I'd probably reach out to my telco and understand better what their policies are. The reality is, by the time somebody goes through that measure to get into your network, you've got something very, very valuable in there. And so you should be, in that prepared phase, you should be thinking through,
what do you have?
What do I have? Is it maybe worth setting up my password reset accounts? So the accounts that alert will be sent to, or that number, is it maybe worth setting that up to a separate account, an extra secure account? Those are extreme measures that on a normal day you may not create separate email accounts and separate places where reset requests will go. But again, if you have something sensitive enough on there that cloning of a SIM card becomes a concern, it's worth, at that stage, maybe even reaching out to a company that specializes in smart home security and work with them and explain to them and look into it.
You've been talking a lot about passwords, the need to have longer passwords, unique passwords, different passwords for different devices. But one of the tips that also we came across was a password manager.
Correct.
So can you explain to people what exactly that is?
Absolutely. So there's two items I'll touch on for that question. The first one is, we'll start with the password manager. So password manager is basically an application that you can load on your phone or in your laptop that securely stores passwords for you. So now you can choose one large, very complex password. That's all you need to remember, and the password program can generate passwords that you can use, or if you are generating your own password, you can store it inside your password manager. So the intent there would be, if you're trying to log into, let's say, your Hydro account to look at Hydro usage, you would pull up your password manager, open that up, see what the password was you were using, and just leverage that, right? And it just comes back to the human capacity for remembering complex passwords. We are creatures of habits. We fall back into the habit and the routine of reusing, or how many times have people used passwords where they increment the last digit, right? You've got a password with the number 1, time to reset it, you make it password with number 2. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's just using these passwords that generate the managers, that generates the random passwords, helps with that a lot. And then in terms of choosing complex passwords, we also recommend that people do not underestimate the power of a phrase. So instead of thinking of a word with letters and numbers, pick a long phrase. So if I tell you a 21-character password, that sounds exhaustive. But if I pick something that is valid for my family and I, but not too revealing, so let's say one of my favorite trips was to Cancun and said, the family loved the trip to Cancun, exclamation mark, number 1, right? That is, like from a computer perspective, that is still just a password. But it's easier for you to remember when you want to use it because it's the way our brains are wired to think. But at the same time, that is an extremely powerful password. It'll take a very long time to get at.
That one's a good tip. That's one I hadn't heard until we started working on this project. So I think that's one that most people could probably use. So right here we have DW on YouTube who's asking, how safe is free Wi-Fi from, you know, many of the different businesses that you can log on to?
That is a very interesting question. And many different security professionals will have different answers for you there. The reality is, whenever something is free and you're accessing, you potentially have the risk for somebody to intercepting your communications or to be affecting it, right? So one of the things that I would recommend if you're going to be using a free Wi-Fi at a cafeteria or anywhere, make sure that it does have a password that you have to obtain at the front desk. This is not the best control in the world, but it's one step better from a free open Wi-Fi where I click and I'm just on and I'm off to the races, right? So again, it's degrees. What I would not do is if I'm on a free Wi-Fi at the cafeteria, I would not open up my bank app and start doing online banking and transferring money, right? Or logging into or to check what's happening with my taxes or submit taxes. For that, you know what? Hop off, use your data plan. That's much more secure. Go to home, go to the office.
Yeah.
You know, we recommend for business users as well to be extremely careful. And we implement solutions around VPN, which is probably more complex than regular consumers would use.
Yeah.
But even for businesses, we recommend that if you're going to get into those scenarios, you need mitigating controls and security for sure.
Sorry, I'm smiling because as you're saying that, I can recall times where I have signed on to free Wi-Fi and did some banking. So that was not the right thing to do. Okay.
Right.
All right. We've got Scott Nazareth here has a similar question on YouTube. We're just going to wait for them to roll on by because I'm not sure that you guys can hear us, but there we go. So similar question on YouTube from Scott Nazareth. How safe is common paid Wi-Fi on airplanes and airports specifically?
As soon as you pay, as soon as you pay for it and there's a password, there's an authentication process, there is a better degree of security. The reality is, let's say for instance the GO train. If I hop on the GO train and I open up my laptop and I spoof or I have the software that can imitate the wireless point that's available, there's a good chance that I can intercept communications, right? So again, the reality is there, if you're going to be working on an airplane and you're going to be working with sensitive information or you're a corporate user, make sure you have a VPN up, make sure that is encrypted. I wouldn't inherently trust it. But if you're hopping on there and you're watching Netflix or you're reading news articles, probably not the worst thing in the world. If I am on there and suddenly I get weird pop-ups on the network asking me to accept something, I would treat that also with a lot more suspicion, right? So again, it's just thinking through the different areas and just realize that you're working on a medium that is open and there's other people working on there with you. And some of them may be malicious, but the chances are the majority of them may not be.
All right, and we've got Dan on Facebook who says, is it just weak passwords that cause a breach?
No, it's not just weak. The weak password is the easiest, the most obvious one to exploit. There's definitely an element of patching that is involved as well. So if you look at a lot of the breach cycles, and within corporations, but for that matter on a smaller scale as well within home users, there are cases where if the units are not patched and I know how to exploit the unit, I can actually get access to the unit as an administrator. And we've seen that with a series of the home routers. If you remember in the media, they had information on home routers where people had an exploit and they were able to get in and then leverage those home devices to launch attacks against businesses. So it's not just passwords, but I think passwords is the first one that a hacker goes after and look at because that is the golden keys to the kingdom, and it's something to be aware of. Again.
And some of these passwords are online for people. There are a list of passwords available online. Is that in fact true?
So yes, so there's two elements to that. There's a list of commonly used passwords, and every year you'll see publications around that. And it's very interesting to open that list and see if maybe your password or elements of your password is being used in there, right? And again, it comes back to human habit and human patterns. But there's also dark sites, there's dark websites that will expose passwords that was compromised. But then there's also sites like Have I Been Owned? You pay later on list the name for that there, but where you can plug in an email address and see if they have records of your account being compromised. And if your account appears in there as being compromised, it's definitely worth making sure that that password, and if you we're in the unfortunate position of using that password anywhere else, definitely you want to go and reset that right away.
Okay. We have Brady V asking on YouTube, is a leaked IP address a cause for concern?
So in the IP address, there's two aspects. There's a public IP address and your internal addressing, right? And I wouldn't cause it, the information within itself, I wouldn't cause a concern, call a cause for concern. It's what the surrounding elements for that would be. So I'm not 100% sure the context in which he's asking, but if it's, for instance, if it's something that your IP address that you use internally in your network has been leaked, if you're on private addressing, the chances are a lot of other people are also using that address. It's just private internally. Okay. If it concerns you, go ahead, change that. If you're using that for something to host a service on the front end, or there's a public IP address that's available to the world, the definition of public is that it's out there. I think it's more understanding the connectivity with when you say leaked, what was connected with that IP address, and what is the concern? What's the possible threat that could come from that IP address being attached to a specific function? So
I'm just going to go back a little bit.
Absolutely.
You were talking about VPNs,
yes.
And we had Scott on YouTube that was wondering, do you suggest using just as I was reading that, it disappeared, of course. Do you suggest using a Tor browser if you don't have a VPN? And I'm not really sure what a Tor browser is.
Right, so Tor browser uses a network called the Onion Network, or Onion routers, and it's an anonymization technology that's out there. So it will encrypt or like traffic from your browser there, and then it anonymizes out to the internet. It's not a bad security measure. It will help. I mean, any layer is better than nothing. The reality is, if I'm capturing information right at your laptop, I'd want to understand what are you doing on the. So, in a lot of cases, Tor and Onion will be for specific protocols. So it'll be for web browsing or specific items. It's not necessarily a blanket encryption mechanism to pull that traffic across. So I would still want to understand what is available, what's happening on the laptop. Am I doing anything else other than web browsing? But definitely, like using a Tor or a browser, if you want to set that up, is one step better than native.
Okay. I don't know if anybody else is wondering this, but how many smart devices do you have in your house, or do you have any at all?
So I have 3.
Okay.
My thermostat.
You have your thermostat?
I have
okay.
my thermostat, which is not linked to anything else. So it's basically, we had Google Home. It answered one day while we were talking in a different room. It decided to answer us even though we weren't talking.
Okay.
After that, my wife promptly walked and unplugged it, and it's been sitting in a box ever since. So it's technically in the house. I wouldn't call it very smart or connected right now. And then I did put some around lights. So, again.
Okay. And why did you do that, I wonder?
So part of it is the techie in me. Part of it is the curiosity of playing and seeing what's possible, right? And I mean, this technology is amazing. It's changing the way we live. With that being said, part of it for my industry is also I was testing it and trying to walk through the thinking pattern and see what people are thinking and why you're enticed to do certain things. The reality, again, is within those, I went through and considered what's the real damage that can be done if any of those were compromised. I mean, I can wake up maybe in a cold house or a warm house, or maybe somebody can turn the lights on and off, and that really annoys me, then I disconnect it, right? So, but again, it's just sort of working your way through. I know other people in our industry that has very, very complete smart homes with very deep integrated technology. But again, at the same time, they've put a lot of time and effort into thinking and understanding the implications.
Right.
So
you're not telling people to stay away from this technology.
Absolutely
you're saying just make sure that you keep it as secure as possible.
No, absolutely. Like, think it through, understand the use. So I'll give you another example. my mother had some surgery that she had to undergo, and so she was in bed rest at home for an extended period of time, and it was difficult for her to get up and move around. And that's actually how I got into the concept of the smart lighting. So I bought some smart lights, put that in place, set it up on her device for her, so that at night if she woke up, she could turn on the lights, turn off the lights, she could use Siri to talk to it, and it made an unbelievable difference in her life and her quality of recovery, right? It was isolated, it was secure, it couldn't do anything else. And it was actually interesting, one of the therapists that came into work with her, one of the physios, saw that and was so intrigued that she asked me to help her understand because she wanted to suggest it to other patients. So there's a classical example of it's just smart lights, but applied in the right context, it made a massive difference for her, and it makes life better. And I think we need to embrace that, but we can't just throw caution out the window. You have to be responsible. If I'm going to put a camera on my house that can video things, there is some considerations that I have to think through and be aware of when I'm going to do that.
And on tonight's episode, we actually met up with two homeowners who had video cameras in their homes and didn't realize those cameras were actually streaming online. So how common is something like that? Is this something that you had come across?
So unfortunately, it's more common than I thought. I was under the impression, maybe that's a fault for me being within the industry, is that, first thing you do is you reset the default password or make sure it has a password, right? Comes back to that very basic, and then run an update. But as you mentioned in your article, there was a Russian website that was pulling feeds based on default passwords, and the amount of cameras in Ontario and Canada and across the world that are broadcasting sensitive, like potentially sensitive or privacy related information was very surprising to me. I did find it very interesting.
Now, we have that article up on our website, and if you'd like to take a look at some of the video there as well, you can go to cbc.ca/marketplace. So why don't we continue with some of the questions here. We have Bert on YouTube. Are there not backdoor hacks on other devices other than routers?
It's possible. The thing with a backdoor hack is sometimes it's maliciously placed, sometimes it's a remainder in code from when they were doing testing. So it comes back to good code practices. It's possible that there could be. We talked about this a little bit as well, as understanding where you're placing the devices and what's being made available. So I would want to be aware of it, but again, by the time somebody digs up a fairly obscure backdoor hack to get into something, they've got a reason for wanting to be in your network, and it's not something common for somebody to exploit. With that being said, it could happen, which is why we tell people update and patch. Just yesterday or earlier this week, there was announcements out from a number of major vendors out in the industry that's releasing patches to fix backdoors. So when vendors do find these, or when it is brought to their attention, they are generally good at patching it. I'd like to believe. You don't always know, but the reality is, what you don't want is to be compromised on an exploit or a backdoor for which there was a patch out because you neglected in patching your system.
Okay. I have a question here that you actually already answered. I think it was Tram Nguyen. Is it worth it to get a password manager? And you did answer that earlier. You think it is?
I think so. Everybody in the industry that I know and in our field uses password managers. You have a lot of passwords, and you're going to get more. As our lives gets more integrated with intranet and day-to-day, you're going to have more and more passwords, right? So just make your life simpler. Get that password manager. Maybe you remember the 2 or 3 passwords. That's very complex, as we had talked about the phrases. So one will be to get into your password manager. Maybe the other one is for banking, because you do use that a lot. Make sure you pick a very strong, complex password there. And then, maybe one other website. But after that, leverage that password manager. There's amazing programs out there, or apps that will sync from your phone to cloud back to your device, so you can update a password on your device, and when you need it tonight, it's available on your phone. And you can just quickly pull it up and work from there.
Just makes things a lot easier, because there are so many passwords you have to remember nowadays.
Correct.
So we have Linda on Facebook. I was thinking of smart home for the elderly or disabled. Theo, would you recommend?
Well, like I've just mentioned my own example.
Yes. I think she meant smart home devices.
Right. It makes a big difference. It can. Again, you have to balance the technical aptitude of the people that you're going to be enabling with the technology. So is it going to help or hinder? right? So that is, you'd have to be careful not to make a blanket assumption on that.
Right.
But if you consider it carefully, yes, it can definitely make their lives better. And then the next step to that is just, again, thinking through like what, you have to put on that hacker's hat and think, if somebody could get in, what's the implications? And it doesn't have to be malicious. Sometimes it's just thinking about when things go wrong. So if your Wi-Fi goes down or your internet is down, does that suddenly prevent them from getting in and out of the door? Right now, suddenly they're used to using an app on their phone and it unlocks the door. The Wi-Fi, or there's a Bluetooth issue and it's not communicating with the app. Just are they still prepared then to pull out a key and open the door? Is there a PIN code that they're used to punching in on the door? Around the lights, is there a way for them to flick the switch on and off and just know how to get around it? So definitely makes life easier when implemented correctly and for the right reasons. But think it through, and especially for elderly people, perhaps that needs care, you don't want to put them in a situation where they need the technology and it's not available and there's no compensating way for them to get around it.
Okay, we have Bert on YouTube saying, should people never donate their phones to charity? Factory reset doesn't clear all your information. It's always still there to be mined, right? Or correct, is what he's saying. I actually have wondered about this myself.
You've wondered about that? Yeah. That is an interesting one. It depends on the different platforms. Again, there's different phones, obviously, that has different standards. I'm not 100% adverse at the different technologies, so I can't comment on that for sure. What I can tell you is, again, think of what you use the phone for, right? What are you doing with it? I wouldn't be against donating my phone, but if this was a work phone or a corporate phone that you've used for very sensitive information, maybe recycling is a better option. Be responsible about the technology, think it through again. But there's ways around. Again, the question is what was on there, how valuable is it? Is it worth the effort for somebody to go in and try and retrieve and open that up? For that matter, if you think about hard drives in your laptop, you can argue that the same way. If that hard drive dies or something go wrong, do I just pull it out? Do I throw it away? Do I recycle it? Again, there's more considerations than maybe just up front, but I wouldn't want to fear monger just for the sake of concern.
It's not a simple yes or no kind of
definitely not
answer that you can give to that, right?
Definitely not. Again, like I said, if that's a corporate phone and you work with trade secrets and there's very valuable information in there, you probably want to follow your corporation or a proper disposal, device disposal policy or procedure to make sure that it is destroyed. If it's something that I used for items that was not really sensitive and I was browsing basic information and making some calls, consider that and think what the implications would be if some of that does come out, and then make your decision accordingly.
Okay. We've got Nathrak on YouTube. What should you do if you're included in a data breach, which a lot of people are getting caught up in lately? Right,
and we're going to see that more and more. So as GDPR, which is really more European focused, but the Canadian Data Privacy Act now in November is going to release new measures that dictates how Canadian corporations have to disclose information to users being involved in a breach when their information is involved. Again, the very first thing I would personally do is reset my password.
Okay.
If you were involved, reset your password.
Yeah.
Then I would look at what was breached. What is the service that got impacted? If it's anything around banking or financial status, anything that could be related to identity theft, it might be worth hopping on your credit score and having a look at a credit report once in a while.
Right.
See, just make sure that nothing else is happening there, which is probably not a bad move in any case to be aware of your credit. It's probably not a bad thing in any case. But also watch out for class action lawsuits. In some cases there will be civil suits depending on what happens. I'd be careful to advise on that just because it depends. It's such a broad range of options, but consider the impact. Sort of think through that. Think through, if I was the hacker and I got that information, how sensitive could that be? What could I do with it? And reset those passwords, change the account if it has to. It might be worth, depending on the sensitivity, shutting down an account and asking them to open a new one. Again, without a bit more context, that question could go in a lot of different directions.
A lot of ways, okay. Yashnane, I think, is on YouTube and asks, can apps collect data hang on, give me a second here, that just got lost again, such as pictures, content from secured password protected folders in cell phones?
So there's a lot of questions there wrapped into one. Can apps collect data on your phone?
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's been a big move within the industry to rewrite end user agreements to make it more understandable and more everyday language. It's not always as legal jargon as it used to. I think the responsibility is on us as owners. If you're going to use something that's going to touch sensitive information, take a moment, read through and understand. A lot of people, even applications such as Facebook and Twitter, a lot of people were shocked when as it's been coming out, like how far these applications are integrated and the information it has access to. But when you install Facebook and it asks for access to your contacts and you say yes, right there, like, does Facebook really need access to my contacts? Maybe it does. We also use the analogy always, it's like, does your thermostat need access to Facebook? Right? So when you're installing these things and you're looking at how they're interlinked, be aware of that. But have a look at the end user agreement. Like, have a look at that EULA. There's very strict rules now around data disclosure policies. If that's not clear, reach out to the manufacturer if you really want to ask. If enough people reach out, it's going to be enough motivation for them to release that information, to take the pressure off of them in a manner. But coming to the second part of the question, this is now where it gets interesting, because she's asking about secure folders. I'd want to understand what a secure folder is, like within that context. If it's encrypted on your hard, so for instance, a password manager will encrypt the information on an encrypted file. So theoretically there, if something hops in and gets a copy of that file, it is designed to be secure unless somebody knows that password to get into it. Again, a mitigating control. But just because something is in a folder that's deemed secure does not necessarily mean it would be. So again, it's a rather complex question, but I'd say do your homework and consider what's going in there and have a look at that.
Okay. All right, so I think we're going to wrap up now. We've got a lot of really great questions from everybody out there on YouTube and on Facebook, so I want to thank you guys for sending in all of those questions. Theo, you have been wonderful. Now we're going to see your team tonight on the episode actually hack into a home, and there were some really great lessons that we learned from that demonstration. So I want to thank you for joining us. For everyone out there, if you'd like to watch the episode tonight, it is at 8 o'clock most time zones across the country, I believe 8:30 in Newfoundland. You can also watch it on YouTube later on tonight. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much. That was a lot of really great information, I think, that people can really use. I hope so. I hope it helps. Like, there's some common sense to it, right? There's just some common knowledge, and it's some discipline, some end user discipline. Like, these things are designed to be comfortable. It's designed to be easy, but just because it's easy doesn't mean we can be lazy.